At the end of Tolland Street, just past the last streetlight, there was a vacant lot filled with things nobody wanted anymore. A cracked dresser, a stack of soaked cardboard, and an old mattress propped against the fence, stained and sagging in the middle. For 3 weeks, a dog had been living beside it. He was a medium-sized brindle mix with floppy ears that never quite stood up straight. Nobody knew his name. What people did know was that a family had moved out of the area about a month earlier, leaving furniture on the curb for the city to haul away. The dog had stayed behind with it. Darlene Kess lived directly across the street, in the house with the chain-link fence and the porch light that stayed on past midnight. She'd been watching him longer than anyone else. She saw him early in the morning, before the block woke up, and again at dusk, when the lot went quiet. After a while, she started leaving food near the fence. That's when she noticed something. The dog wouldn't touch the food while she stood there. He'd wait until she stepped back, sometimes all the way to her porch, and only then would he come over to eat. She noticed something else, too. Whenever she, or anyone else not tried to get closer than that, the dog would leave the mattress. He wouldn't always go far. Sometimes it was only to the other side of the lot. But once the person gave up and walked away, he went right back. "He's waiting for that family," Darlene told one of her neighbors. "That's why he keeps coming back." It was an explanation that made sense, partly because it was so easy to feel sorry for him, but there was one thing it didn't explain. If the dog was waiting on that mattress, why did he leave it every time somebody tried to get near him? Wes Halpern heard about the dog through a rescue group 2 towns over. He'd been doing this work for 6 years, long enough to know that patience usually mattered more than speed, and that every dog had its own pace. He drove out on a Thursday afternoon, parked well short of the lot, and sat on the tailgate of his truck with a bag of food beside him. For almost 20 minutes, he did nothing. The dog lifted his head when the truck door closed, but Wes stayed where he was. Eventually, he stood and took a few slow steps toward the lot. The dog got up. Wes moved a little closer, and the dog crossed to the far corner. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't barking or charging at Wes. He simply moved far enough to keep roughly the same amount of space between them. Wes stopped, crouched down, placed a piece of food on the ground, and backed away. It took another 10 minutes, but eventually the dog came forward and ate. "That's something," Wes said, glancing toward Darlene's porch. "I'll give him a few more visits." At the time, it looked like progress. What Wes didn't realize was that the dog had already shown him the pattern that would eventually change the entire rescue. He hadn't refused to leave the mattress. He'd left when Wes got too close, then returned when Wes gave him room. So, why did he keep coming back to a place he abandoned every time somebody tried to reach him? That question was still unanswered when the next attempts started going wrong. By his 3rd visit, Wes thought he understood the situation well enough to make a little more progress. He'd been careful so far, but winter was getting closer, and every extra day outside came with its own risks. So this time, he tried closing the gap a little faster. He misjudged it by maybe 6 feet. The dog was already moving before Wes had crossed half the lot. He cut toward the back fence, slipped through a narrow gap between 2 panels, and disappeared into a neighbor's yard. Wes followed almost automatically. It wasn't recklessness. It was the same instinct that had helped him keep frightened dogs from disappearing before. He kept his voice low and followed at a distance, hoping the dog would slow down. He didn't. The dog crossed a side street and vanished between the houses. Wes spent the next 40 minutes walking the neighborhood before he finally found him crouched behind a row of garbage cans 2 streets away. This time, Wes didn't approach. He stood where he was, catching his breath, looking at a dog who had covered far more ground trying to get away than Wes had ever managed to close between them. Later that evening, he admitted his frustration to Darlene. Maybe he just doesn't want anybody getting near him. Darlene looked across the street toward the lot. Could be, but he'll come back. She was right. By the next morning, the dog was on the mattress again. That made the situation even harder to understand. The following weekend, Wes brought 3 volunteers. The idea was reasonable. If one person couldn't keep track of every possible exit, more people could cover the open sides of the lot without anyone having to chase him. At least, that was the plan. They spread out slowly along the edges, leaving space between them as they tried to close off the easiest escape routes. The dog noticed before they were ready. He found the one gap nobody had covered, ran through it, crossed Tolland Street without slowing down, and kept going toward Fairview. Fairview was 4 lanes of steady traffic, only 3 blocks away. For almost an hour, nobody knew where the dog was. Wes drove slowly through the surrounding streets with his window down, checking yards, alleys, and the narrow spaces between buildings. At that point, getting a leash on him didn't matter anymore. Wes just wanted to find him before he reached the road. Eventually, he spotted the brindle dog pressed close to a utility pole about a block from Fairview, with traffic moving steadily beyond him. Wes stayed back. If he moved closer and the dog ran again, there was nowhere good for him to go. So Wes waited. After a while, the dog began moving through the neighborhood on his own, working his way back through yards and quieter streets. That night, Wes sat in his truck across from the vacant lot and found himself thinking about the rescue differently. Every time they tried harder to help this dog, he ended up farther away. And this time, he'd nearly ended up beside a 4-lane road. Was that just bad luck, or were they somehow making it worse? Wes didn't have an answer. A few hours later, he only had relief. The dog was back on the mattress. Again. It was the place he kept returning to, and somehow also the place he abandoned every time people tried too hard to reach him. If the mattress was really what he wanted, why did help keep sending him away from it? If you want to understand your dog better and improve their quality of life, I left a resource in the description that may help. Darlene had something Wes didn't. She was there every day. She saw what happened when rescuers showed up, but she also saw the dog when nobody was trying to do anything with him. Over time, she'd started noticing a pattern. A few days after the Fairview scare, she brought it up while she and Wes were sitting on her porch. "You know what I keep noticing?" Wes looked over at her. "If somebody stops, he stops too. But if they keep after him, he just keeps going." Wes looked toward the lot and thought about the last few attempts, the volunteers spreading out around him, the chase through the neighbor's yard, how much farther the dog had gone each time. "So, when we keep moving in, he keeps moving out," Darlene said. "That's all I'm saying." She wasn't trying to explain why the dog did it. She'd simply watched it happen enough times to notice, and what she was describing fit something Wes already knew, but hadn't really applied to this dog. When a dog moves away, that movement is information. It doesn't always mean the dog is refusing contact. Sometimes he's simply trying to create more space. And if moving away doesn't stop an uncomfortable approach, an uncertain dog may try to create even more distance. Wes decided to try something different. If stories like this help you see dogs differently, subscribe to Paws of Fate. And if this story has already changed the way you're reading his behavior, leave a like. On the next visit, Wes parked in the same place, but he didn't get out right away. When he finally did, he walked to a spot about 30 feet from the mattress, sat on an overturned crate, and stayed there. The dog stood up, just as he always did. He moved a few steps away. Then he stopped. Wes didn't follow him. He didn't call him over or try to steal another few feet. He simply stayed on the crate and waited. 20 minutes passed. Eventually, the dog lay down again. He was farther away than before, but he was still there. The next visit looked almost exactly the same. There was no obvious breakthrough, no sudden moment where the dog seemed completely different. Wes left wondering whether he'd made too much of that first afternoon. Then, 2 visits later, something changed. Wes sat down with his lunch, and about 15 feet away, the dog stayed on the mattress. He didn't come closer, but he didn't leave. A few days after that, Wes began packing up to go home. Before he'd even finished, the dog walked back to the mattress while Wes was still standing in the lot. That had never happened before. The changes were small enough that someone passing by probably wouldn't have noticed them. But Wes did. The dog wasn't suddenly affectionate, and he wasn't suddenly comfortable with everything around him. He simply wasn't creating as much distance anymore. And that was progress. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. There was no special plan that day. Wes was sitting on the same overturned crate he'd been using for weeks when the dog stood up. Only this time, he didn't move away. He came toward Wes, slowly. He stopped once, looked around, then came a little closer. A few feet later, he stopped again. Wes stayed where he was. And after a moment, the dog continued. For weeks, Wes had been the one trying to cross the space between them. This time, he wasn't. The dog was. When he finally came close enough, Wes slipped the leash over his head. There was no chase, no rush, just a leash and a dog standing beside him. 2 days later, the dog went to Nell Rourke's home on the other side of town. Nell had fostered rescue dogs before, so she wasn't expecting much from him right away. For the first few days, she didn't even have a name for him. Sometimes she called him the boy. Sometimes it was the brindle guy. Mostly, she just gave him room. Almost immediately, she noticed the same pattern Wes had seen on Tolland Street. If Nell walked toward him too directly, he'd stand up and move to the far side of the yard. She didn't follow. She went back to whatever she'd been doing. And eventually, he came back. After about a week, Nell started calling him Rook. There wasn't much of a story behind the name. She tried it one day, kept using it, and it stuck. The distance didn't disappear overnight. Some days, Rook still stood up the moment Nell came outside. On other days, he stayed where he was. But gradually, the amount of space he created started to change. The other side of the yard became a few feet. A few feet became a step or two. And sometimes, eventually, he didn't move at all. Weeks later, Nell sent Wes a short video from her living room. Rook was lying on a dog bed near the window while Nell walked past him. She came fairly close. Rook lifted his head and watched her for a second. Then he lowered his head again. He stayed exactly where he was. It doesn't look like much, but if you'd seen him on Tolland Street, leaving the mattress, crossing yards, running farther every time someone followed, that tiny moment meant something completely different. At the beginning, everyone believed Rook kept returning to the mattress because he was waiting for the family who had left him there. Maybe familiarity was part of it, maybe waiting was too. But it never explained everything. Because while everyone was watching where he came back to, Rook was also showing them what made him leave. Someone got too close. He moved away. If they kept coming, he moved farther. For weeks, the people trying hardest to help him didn't realize they were part of that pattern. What finally changed wasn't a better trap or somebody moving faster. Wes stopped chasing the distance, and over time, Rook stopped creating so much of it. Sometimes the answer isn't in where a dog comes back to. It's in what makes him leave. Was there ever a dog in your life whose behavior only made sense to you later? Something you wish you'd understood sooner? Tell me about them in the comments.